Greetings and welcome to the Halloween edition of the Sliders Review. And I'm here today to talk to you about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the 1974 indie slasher movie. So technically, even though like Psycho came out in 1960, this movie is credited for pretty much establishing the trademarks that come to that of a slasher movie. The big hulking like killer, the big machinery type weapon, the term final girl, stuff like that. Although it's strange because most people credit Halloween for like the rise of like slasher movies, when in fact it was this movie about 2 years prior and stuff. But maybe because it's an indie movie, people just don't consider it. But it is what it is. Like, this is the one that really truly kickstarted like all those copycats and everything. And so I watched this movie for the first time. And by that, I mean I watched it in June. I'm recording this in June. I'm uploading it for the Halloween month and stuff like that. Now, technically, this, like I said before, this is my first time watching this one. However, I do believe I watched the 2003 one with Jessica Biel back when I was in college. I remember me and my college friends, we went somewhere. We went to one of their friends' house and this was on. Well, the 2003 movie was on. And so I watched it. I had no idea what the heck was going on and I don't remember nothing. All I remember is some girl ran out the front door or jumped out the window or something like that and ran. That's all I remember. So this movie has the infamous Leatherface killer and stuff. And I've always heard the term Leatherface. I just never knew who the heck they was talking about. But I have seen imagery of a guy wearing kind of like a suit with a mask on and having a chainsaw. But I never knew it really came from like this movie. And when I heard the name Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I automatically assumed this could be based on like a true story. Now, technically, the marketing for this said that this is based on a true story. However, the entire movie is fiction and stuff. But this movie killer is based on a real life serial killer who used to wear women's skins on his body, Ed Gein. And so like he has been used for killers such as like Psycho and Silence of the Lambs and stuff like that. Now, when it comes to this movie, they had a heck of a time trying to get somebody to pick it up and show it in like the theaters. And finally, somebody was able to do it. And they tried to take out a lot of the gore so that it can get a PG rating or PG-13 rating, but they went and made it R. And because of the movie and because stuff like this really didn't come out beforehand, a lot of movie theaters banned it from like, their theaters and stuff, especially international, because a lot of people were just kind of like, they just wasn't into like horror and stuff like that. I remember the same thing happened to the Evil Dead, the Exorcist and stuff like that. They was afraid that movies like this, along with like, the band Kiss and everything will bring on like demons or some type of devil worshipping type thing. Kind of like Candace Cameron Bure, who literally says she doesn't watch like horror movies because like they can open a portal to some type of demonic dimension. Boy, I don't know what's going on in her head. The things that woman says are just bizarre, but not as crazy as her brother. Anyway. So, like, this movie was banned for like the longest time. But, it has like a huge cult like following and everything. it only made about like 30 million, I think, at the box office, which is like I think 150 now or something like that. But it was like a huge craze. People loved this movie. It had like a budget around 80 million to what was it, like 140 million or something like that. Or and so like, the person who actually created this and stuff, the person who like, produced it, composed it and directed it was Toby Hooper. And so like he wanted to do this, he was from Texas and he was like working on some type of thing in college, a film, and just had this idea. Plus the political landscape was like changing and stuff like that. And so he got that of Kim, say Hinky or something like that, or Hinkle, something like that, to like, write it and stuff. And I gotta say, like, at first, this movie started to bore me because, like, for the longest time, all people are doing are talking. And that's it for like the longest freaking time. But then once it get to like the killing and especially that third act in the chase sequence, oh, it kicked up big time. But like I said before, he tried to like take out a lot of the gore because he wanted that PG-13 rating. Which I was like, why are people dying in this movie yet? Like everybody's just talking. Now, the guy from Night Court, John, and I can't even pronounce his last name, he was the narrator of this movie. And he did a really good job narrating. And they paid him in weed, of all things. It was the 70s. And so, like, when it comes to this entire franchise, there's actually been about 9 movies, a couple of novels, and 2 video games. Now, after I watched this, I watched the second, and I was very shocked and surprised about how different it was and how silly, because it was a black comedy. I guess the people who created Megan's all like, well, if they went from slasher to a comedy movie, then we can go from like a killer robot movie to like, an action spy movie. And then I tried to watch another one. I can't remember which one it was, but it was not a remake. It's the one that like tries to pick up in between the first and the second movie with a whole new cast. I think it came out in like 2013 or something like that. And like, I started to watch it. I'm like, okay, well, the new cook and everything, he looks similar to the original actor and everything. And I'm like, who the heck are the rest of these family members in the house? Because it was literally only 3 people in the house in the original that lived there. But then, one dude died and got hit by that car and stuff like that. And it's just kind of like, who the heck are the rest of these people? Like, they wasn't there when that woman jumped out like the window and stuff. So I just stopped watching after that. Plus, a lot of people say it isn't good. In fact, none of the sequels have done like all that well. Like a lot of people hate the sequels and the prequels and everything and the reboots and the remakes. And so far, only the first one seems to be the only good one. And even though I haven't seen all the other ones except for like 2.5, because when I watched the one with Jessica Biel, I got halfway into the movie because we got there late. Yeah, the first one is the better one. That chase sequence at the end, boy, they ran a marathon. This is like, are they going to stop for like the breathe? And so, like, this movie, like I said before, it was so much dialogue and it just was like just getting on my nerves. But then once it started to get into the actual slashery stuff, It really truly did. I can see now why it inspired so many copycat movies. There is something about like the cinematography and everything of like, first of all, it's filmed in actual film, so you got the grain to it. I love that in slasher movies. There's just something about like a group of people doing their thing and not knowing there's like a real scary crazy person out there that can like get them, and then gets them like one by one in a very gruesome kind of way, and then chases like, like a final girl and stuff. And like, it's secluded. Sometimes it's at night, sometimes it's during the day. It's out like in the woods and everything, which is really creepy and stuff. Like, I can totally see now why it inspired all those copycats. Now in 2024, this movie was presented to kind of like, I forget what it's called, like the film registry or something like that, or like the House of Congress, to be preserved there and stuff. This movie, it's crazy. Now that I watched this movie, I now see like a bunch of like modern stuff emulate this movie. Like, take Van Helsing, the sci-fi television show that came out a few years ago. There's an episode where the good guys go to like this sheriff station, and for whatever reason, the sheriff, and his people are trying to keep like, the heroes like at the station and stuff like that, and won't let them leave. Then all of a sudden they're cannibals and they eat vampires, and they're hicks, and like, they talk all like, country and stuff like that. And it reminds me so much of this. Also, The Walking Dead has done it a couple of times, and The Walking Dead video game and stuff, and so many other things. And this movie also kind of started that stereotype of like these redneck hits that are like super country and slasher movies and stuff. We saw that in The Strangers Chapter 1, the newer one that came out like I think 2 years ago and stuff. And because normally when you see like, a country redneck hit person, they're like super country, super suspicious looking and stuff like that. This movie was also that trope that started the whole dumb blonde thing. Instead of running out the front door, they run up the stairs for some reason. And of course, you can't forget the whole like slasher movie of a predominantly white cast. I'm not even joking. Everybody in this movie is white, except for one Mexican guy who's a truck driver at the very end of the movie, and is only there for a couple of seconds. And I was surprised to see that guy. I'm like, holy crap, he's like Latina. Now, the sequel has one lonely black woman in a room full of white people, and she's kind of in the back, and she's only there for like 10 seconds. This is why a lot of the newer ones try to have a more diverse cast and stuff. And when it comes to this movie, a lot of the sequels, the second, the third movie, and I think the fourth, all tie in together, maybe the fifth, but then after a while, they started rebooting and then doing prequels and stuff like that. I watched the trailer for one, a prequel of like a remake, and it was just disturbing. That boy, I think it was supposed to be, I think it was called Leatherface. Yeah, it was like his origin or whatever, and he's wearing like a giant pig head or like a hippopotamus or something. That thing was just disturbing looking. I was not gonna watch that. Plus, like I said before, a lot of people say the sequels just aren't that good, so I just decided to bow out. But I do praise that one movie. Still, I can't remember the name of it. That tried to, be a tie-in between the first and the second movie. They really, truly did. Now, this movie was filmed in Texas, and the cast was a bunch of like unknown people at that time. And of course, that's a whole lot cheaper paying than like some established, like, actor and stuff. And the acting, well, it's 1970s acting. I've never been a fan of 1970 acting. I don't care what movie it is. Like, I love the Evil Dead movie, the first one. But the acting was horrible in that movie. Halloween, the acting wasn't all that great either. I've just never been a fan of 1970 acting. I'm just not. Now, sadly, almost every person who filmed this movie is dead. From the cast, I think maybe the director and maybe the writer, I'm not sure, but the majority of the cast have passed away. I'm just gonna say right here, right now, rest in peace. It sucks that these iconic stars in this iconic movie who played these iconic characters are now deceased. So basically, this movie is about a group of friends, and they're driving to Texas because Franklin has like inherited like a house from like a dead relative and stuff. And so like Franklin, trying to think, is played by Paul A. Parton. And so, like, he passed away. Marlene Burns, she passed away. She plays Sally, our final girl. Now, Franklin is actually in a wheelchair. I started seeing this pop up a lot, especially in the 1980s. And in fact, in 1986, about 8 years after the first movie, they had a sequel and stuff. And so they're joined by like their friend Pam, Jerry, and Kurt, and they're just driving along, and they pick up a hitchhiker. And there's something wrong with the hitchhiker. He has this weird stain or birthmark on his face, and like he's mentally inept. Now the hitchhiker actor, he's still alive and everything till this day. And so, but the dude did a great job for an unknown actor. Edwin something, I think it's Edwin Neal, I think his last name is. And so he's just talking to them and freaking them out. Now it's funny because like they're trying to use big words. So it's hot in Texas. He's walking, they're driving, and they're all like, he might asphyxiate out here instead of saying he might get like dehydrated out here. And so like he's just creeping them out, talking about like, well, first Franklin was creeping them out about how they like kill like, cows and stuff. Now, instead of hitting them in the head, they had like this little dart gun and stuff like that. And the hitchhiker was all like, nah, you gotta like do it the old fashioned way. It's so much better and everything. And it's just creeping them out. And I think his name is Newbin. See, when it came to the sequel, they finally gave the family a first and last name because they had a very generic name. He's just known as Hitchhiker. His dad is known as the Cook, and his brother is known as Leatherface. But Newbin has a twin brother that's going to appear in the sequel. And so, like, they had enough with this dude, and they just kick him out. So basically, they stop at like a gas station or something like that. They gas up, they get some food. The gas station, the cook, he's all like, I think Drayton, I think that's what they call him in the second movie. This dude is hilarious. The actor who plays him and stuff, like I think it's Jim Sheldon, I think it's something like that. And he's just hilarious in this movie and in the second one. And I can't believe he's not really an actor. The dude can just talk and talk, and I could just listen to him for hours. And so he's trying to keep them there. It's all like, come get some barbecue and stay for the barbecue. That was just suspicious how he was very adamant about keeping them there. But anyway, they get some barbecue food, and as Franklin's eating it, the way he's eating it is kind of disturbed. And so it's very disturbing, and it has an unusual sound when he chews. And I'm just like, I bet that's human he's eating. And oh, I forgot to mention the best part, the opening with the narration, because somebody stole a bunch of corpses from a gravesite, and there's this like really gruesome display of like a dead body that helps set the mood for like the movie. And so like so anyway, one of the reasons why they kicked the hitchhiker out because he pulled out a knife and like a razor blade and just started cutting like Franklin. And you know what's weird is that after he cut Franklin, Franklin kind of started to act like him a little bit. It was weird. But in a way, they eventually get to the house and they're looking around. Franklin's feeling unappreciated because he's in a wheelchair while everybody else is checking out the house. I think it's like a brother-sister duo and they head to like a pond or something like that. And they stumble upon like a house out in the middle of nowhere. Well, when they get there, they see a giant man with a skin on his face and a chainsaw. And so he kills the guy. He puts the girl on like a hook and everything. It was so like primal, like because the way she's dressed is very 1970s, very like hot looking. I think she has like a tank top and some like Daisy Dukes or something like that, and her flip flops come off, and it's just so primal seeing her and her bare legs and feet, dangling in the air as he's like carrying her and stuff. And so he puts her on like a hook. And then eventually one of their friends goes to like investigate and then he ends up dead and everything. And then it's like, it's Franklin and it's Sally there in the woods and Leatherface gets like Franklin. This freaks Sally out and she literally runs a marathon as like, Leatherface is chasing behind her, cutting down the shrubbery and everything, and she's just booking it. And the way she's running, because she's like a very new to like acting and everything, it's a combination of just regular running, jogging, and that of like Hollywood slasher running and everything. And I do kind of like that because it feels a bit more realistic. But I do appreciate the Hollywood running a heck of a lot more than just the regular person running. So as she's running, she goes back to the gas station. How the heck did she get that far from the house? The heck if I know. But she ran that marathon. And so then it's the big twist reveal that like the cook in the gas station, there's something fishy with him. And he ties her up and knocks her out and stuff. And so he drives her back to the home. And then, like, he meets the hitchhiker and everything. And we now see once again Leatherface. But, like, Leatherface is now dressed like a woman for some bizarre reason. I'll get into that a little bit later. And so she wakes up. She's very disturbed as to what's going on. They're about to feed, like, have dinner and everything. They bring in the grandpa. Now, the grandfather, he's actually still alive. He's played by John Duggan or Duggar. Duggar, that's it. Duggar. And he's 70 now. And he's been in like 3 of these installments. He was in the first one as the grandfather. He was in the Chainsaw Massacre like 3D. And another one. I forget which one. The one that return to like the Chainsaw Massacre and everything. Now a lot of them did return for I think the Return of the Chainsaw because Kim wrote and directed that one. And so, yeah, he's been like in 3 installments, playing 2 completely different characters and stuff. It was so disturbing when they like cut her finger and he's like sucking the blood. The way he sucks it is very, very, very creepy and disturbing. But eventually, she like breaks free and everything. She runs up the stairs, jumps out the window, and all of a sudden, it's like daylight. I'm like, what? Oh, like just a few seconds ago, it was nighttime. How is it like early in the morning now? But anyway, she's booking it again. And Newbin, or the hitchhiker dude, he's chasing behind her with like his switchblade type thing, and he's just like cutting her, a razor blade thing, and he's like cutting her, slashing her in the back. And actually, tell you the truth, it's crazy. The second Stranger movie, Prey of Night, they copied a scene from this as like the final girl is like running. She like, stops a car. She stops a pickup truck. And that's when the Mexican dude comes out, and like he grabs, I think, like a wrench, and he's going to fight like Leatherface. But then we don't know what happened to him after that. She kind of just deserts him and hops in the back of a truck. And this is where Strangers Pray at Night copied and everything, because the final girl, she stops like a truck and she hops in the back of the truck as like the killer is trying to like, get her and everything. And one of the best moments comes from this scene. It's like she's screaming and hollering because she's like scared. But then her screams turn into laughter because she knows she beat the killer and she survived and everything. And I think she flips him off. I can't remember. And it's just like a cool scene because it's like, yes, she survived and everything. And she's so happy and joyful and everything. And then he does the dance. Where Leatherface does what people call the chainsaw dance. Don't know why he's spinning around with a chainsaw, but it just looks cool and everything, and I like it. But back to him cross-dressing. Now, when it comes to Bubba, aka Leatherface, it's never explained why he is the way he is in this movie. Now, they probably explain in the prequels, but I've never seen those. And so the thing about him is that he has trouble forming sentences. He is kind of mentally inept. And there's something wrong with his face. For some reason, he has to cover it up. So Gunnar Hansen plays that of Leatherface, and he only does it for the first movie. He doesn't return for the second. There was actually 3 people who played Leatherface in like the second movie. And so Leatherface, he has 2 distinct looks. His name is actually Bubba Sawyer. And there's one look where he's dressed like a man in a suit, and there's another one where he's dressed like a woman in the kitchen. It is never ever explained in this movie why he dresses like a woman, but he only does it for this movie and not the second one. Now, they might explain it in one of the prequels. I'm just never gonna watch none of those movies. I'm just not interested. But like, it's never explained. Now, there is a trope of serial killers cross-dressing and everything like drag queens, and it has infuriated the LGBT community. In fact, it has to do with Ed Glenn, the person that is it Glenn or Jen? Well, it's one of those two. The one who inspired these killers, because Leatherface, Norman Bates, and what's his name? Buffalo Bill is inspired by Ed. And all 3 of them crest dross and everything. However, Ed never did. He merely just took the skin off like women victims and placed it on his body. And so, but for some reason, I guess people back in the 70s interpret that as, in the 60s, interpret that as cross-dressing. And, this movie has actually been depicted as like, being very violent towards women. However, there's only 2 women that are being violent towards, and the other 3 are like men. So like, yeah. And this movie is also calls people, I think, calls something to be like pro-vegetarian. I didn't read too much into that because I really didn't care. But yeah, so yeah, this movie is the one that inspired them all, apparently, and stuff, and not Halloween. But for some reason, Halloween was the one that really kicked off, like, the copycat movies of like the 80s like slasher movies and stuff. That wasn't that spooky. Alright, well, I shall talk to y'all later. Bye.